Hi guy, welcome to TV Spoilers. King didn't need a warning from anyone to understand what was coming next. In Genoa City, power never changed hands quietly, and Victor Newman never accepted a setback as anything other than a temporary inconvenience. Even when Victor appeared to retreat, even when he forced himself to nod politely in a boardroom or let someone else enjoy a victory lap, Kane had lived long enough in this world to recognize the pattern beneath the surface. Victor always kept score and he always collected. The problem wasn't just that Newman had recently lost a measure of control, or that Victor's grip had slipped enough for others to breathe again. The problem was that Victor would see that loss as humiliation. And humiliation, to him, was an invitation to retaliate with interest. Kane's mind kept circling the same fear not because he lacked imagination, but because his imagination was too precise. Victor wouldn't simply strike back in one obvious direction. He wouldn't storm into the open and announce his revenge like a man who needed applause. He would look for leverage, for weak joints in his enemy's armor, for relationships he could fracture or rewrite. He would recruit partners who hated the same people he hated, or he would manufacture hatred in someone who had been neutral yesterday. He would shape alliances like weapons. And the deadliest weapons were always the ones that didn't look like weapons until it was too late. That was why the emerging Victor-Jack alignment chilled Kane more than any headline. Kane didn't have to pretend Jack was innocent. Jack Abbott was capable of cold calculation when his world demanded it, and he was capable of making compromises that would shock the people, who still believed in the simpler version of him. The thought of Jack, steady and respected, standing even partially beside Victor, created a kind of balance Kane didn't like. Victor was brute force wrapped in sophistication. Jack was legitimacy wrapped around ambition. Together they could become something neither of them could achieve alone. A coalition that looked reasonable from the outside, while quietly rewriting the rules underneath everyone else's feet. Kane could already picture it Victor regaining ground not by clawing it back in the open, but by letting Jack's credibility carry him through doors that were currently closed. Kane also understood the timing. Victor didn't need to strike immediately. In fact, waiting would serve him. Let the city settle into its false sense of security. Let his opponents grow bold. Let them make careless decisions because they believed the storm had passed. Victor's revenge was never about speed. It was about inevitability. He wanted his enemies to feel, in the moment they finally realized what was happening, that there had never been a way out. So Kane made a decision that didn't come from confidence but from a refusal to be passive. If Victor was going to build alliances, then Kane would build one first. If Victor was going to weaponize relationships, then Kane would do the same with more discipline, more secrecy, and more strategy. Kane didn't want a loud war that attracted attention and forced everyone to choose sides too soon. He wanted something quieter, something surgical, something that could slip under Victor's radar long enough to matter. The problem was finding the right person to stand with him. Not everyone in Genoa City could handle a plan that required patience. Not everyone could pretend to be an enemy in public while acting like a partner in private. It took a particular kind of personality to wear two faces without letting either one crack. It took someone who could live with the moral discomfort of deception. Someone whose pride wouldn't demand immediate recognition. Someone whose anger could be focused instead of wasted. And when Kane thought of enduring anger that had survived time, disappointment, and humiliation, his mind went to one name without hesitation: Billy Abbott. Billy was the obvious choice for the wrong reasons, which made him the perfect choice for the right ones. On the surface, Billy seemed impulsive, emotional, messy. He always looked like a man who couldn't help himself. He promised people he would change. He swore he was done chasing ghosts. He declared he was finally ready to focus on a future that didn't revolve around vengeance. Then, inevitably, something inside him snapped, and he ran back toward the same darkness as if it were the only place he knew how to breathe. People underestimated Billy because he kept repeating his mistakes, because he kept bleeding his emotions into public view, because he kept letting his enemies see him coming. But Kane didn't underestimate him. Kane recognized a dangerous kind of persistence in Billy's obsession. It wasn't the bright, explosive rage of a man who wanted to fight right now. It was slower than that. It was heavier. It was the rage of someone who believed, deep down, that he had been cheated out of dignity, and that the only way to reclaim it was to force the universe to admit it had wronged him. That kind of obsession didn't fade. It evolved. It waited. It became clever when necessary. And Billy's relationship with Victor was complicated in a way that no one could simplify into a single emotion. Billy didn't just hate Victor. Billy hated what Victor represented: power without apology, control without consequence, success earned through intimidation and then justified as strength. Yet Billy had also been shaped by Victor's shadow. Victor was the kind of enemy who made you define yourself in opposition to him, even when you didn't want to. Victor had become a measuring stick Billy couldn't stop looking at. A reminder of everything Billy felt he should have been, could have been, deserved to be. Every time Billy looked at Victor, he didn't just see a rival. He saw a verdict. He saw a man who always won, and he saw what it did to everyone who tried to stand against him. Kane knew that kind of enemy could be useful. Because if Billy truly wanted real revenge, not the kind that fizzled out after a few punches, then Billy would be willing to do things he normally wouldn't. He would be willing to swallow his pride. He would be willing to play a longer game. He would be willing to become something sharper, something colder, something Victor wouldn't anticipate until the blade was already in his hand. Still, Kane didn't approach Billy lightly. An alliance with Billy came with risks. Billy could be unpredictable. Billy could sabotage himself at the worst possible moment, either because his emotions overcame his logic, or because he couldn't resist proving something to himself. Kane had to offer Billy a reason to stay disciplined. Kane had to present the plan in a way that didn't sound like a lecture or a trap. Most importantly, Kane had to be honest with himself about his own motives. He wasn't reaching for Billy purely because he needed him. Kane was reaching for Billy because Billy's obsession could become a shield for Kane's strategy. If the plan failed, people would blame Billy's volatility. If the plan succeeded, Kane could remain partially hidden behind Billy's visible chaos. Billy was a distraction Victor might underestimate, and in a world built on underestimation, distractions were currency. When Kane finally moved toward Billy, he didn't do it with theatrics. He didn't set up a dramatic meeting designed to impress or intimidate. He chose the simplest possible approach because simplicity reduced suspicion. He didn't want Billy to feel ambushed. He wanted Billy to feel chosen. Billy, of course, didn't make it easy. There was a certain tightness in Billy's posture when Kane brought the conversation toward Victor, as if Billy's body already anticipated the emotional cost before his mind decided whether to pay it. Kane could see the reflexive defensiveness, the instinct to refuse, not because Billy lacked desire, but because Billy had been burned enough times to associate offers of alliance with manipulation. Billy had spent too long being used by other people's agendas, and even when he acted like he didn't care, the damage had carved itself into him. Kane didn't push too hard at first. He let the idea settle into the air like smoke. He talked about Victor's recent losses, about the way power didn't vanish but simply shifted shape, about how Victor would be looking for ways to reclaim what he believed was his by birthright. Kane spoke in calm, controlled tones, not because he was trying to sound superior, but because he understood something Billy needed: proof that this wasn't an emotional tantrum disguised as strategy. Kane made it clear that he wasn't proposing a reckless war. He was proposing prevention. He was proposing defense that looked like offense that looked like chaos, chaos that was actually controlled. Billy's hesitation didn't come from a lack of hatred. It came from exhaustion. There was a part of Billy that wanted to believe he could outrun the cycle, that wanted to imagine a version of himself who didn't wake up every morning with Victor's name sitting like a stone in his chest. Billy didn't want to be predictable anymore. He didn't want to be the man everyone pointed to when they needed an example of wasted potential. He didn't want his life to be reduced to one endless attempt to prove he was stronger than the forces that kept humiliating him. But Kane knew the truth Billy tried to hide from himself. The obsession wasn't optional. It wasn't a hobby Billy could drop when it became inconvenient. It was threaded through Billy's identity. As long as Victor existed as the embodiment of everything Billy despised, Billy would feel compelled to challenge him. The only question was whether Billy would keep doing it in ways that destroyed him, or whether Billy would finally do it in a way that made Victor bleed. Kane took a risk and leaned into that truth. He didn't flatter Billy with empty praise, and he didn't insult Billy into compliance. He simply gave Billy what Billy secretly craved: the promise that this time, revenge could be earned, not just imagined. Kane framed it as a rare opportunity, an opening Victor had accidentally created by losing ground, an opening that might never appear again. Kane didn't claim Victor was weak. Kane claimed Victor was wounded. And wounded predators were the most dangerous, but also the most likely to make a mistake if you forced them to move before they were ready. Billy's eyes sharpened at that. Not excitement, something more cautious, more calculating. Kane could see Billy doing the mental math, weighing the risk against the satisfaction, weighing the danger against the hunger. There was a moment where Billy's face hardened. and Kane recognized it as the moment Billy stopped pretending he didn't want this. Still, Billy didn't surrender to the idea quickly. He questioned the purpose, the practicality, the cost. He didn't want a partnership that ended with him taking the fall, while someone else walked away clean. He didn't want to be a pawn in Kane's war. Billy's pride demanded that if he was going to commit, he would commit on his own terms. Kane understood. He had expected resistance, and he had built the offer around it. He didn't ask Billy to become someone new. He asked Billy to become who he already was, only sharper. Kane didn't say Billy had to abandon his anger. Kane said Billy's anger was the key. Kane didn't ask Billy to forgive Victor or move on. Kane asked Billy to weaponize what he felt and use it strategically instead of emotionally. Then Kane revealed the core of the plan. They would create a secret alliance. One built not on public loyalty but on private coordination. In public, they would remain exactly what everyone expected them to be. They would clash, disagree, argue, undermine each other, and make it impossible for anyone watching to suspect cooperation. Their public hostility would be their camouflage, and behind that camouflage, they would share information, anticipate Victor's moves, and disrupt his strategies before they had a chance to take root. The idea was elegant in the way dangerous things often were. It didn't require them to become close friends. It didn't require them to trust each other completely. It required them to understand one basic truth: Victor's power depended on predictability. He thrived when he could read people's motivations and manipulate them accordingly. If Kane and Billy could create unpredictability, they could make Victor misread the board. Then Victor's dominance would start to crack. The brilliance of the plan was that it used Victor's own instincts against him. Victor would expect Billy to lash out. Victor would expect Kane to maneuver. Victor would expect both of them to pursue their agendas openly and selfishly. He would not expect them to sacrifice public pride for private coordination. He would not expect Billy to play a long game. He would not expect Kane to ally himself with someone so volatile. And because Victor wouldn't expect it, he wouldn't prepare for it. Billy listened without interrupting, but Kane could sense the storm inside him. Billy's mind didn't reject the plan. It tested it, pressured it, searched for weak points. Billy had been fooled before, and he didn't want to walk into another trap disguised as opportunity. Yet the more Kane spoke, the more Billy seemed pulled towards something he had almost forgotten: hope. Not hope in the sentimental sense, but hope as in possibility. The possibility that Victor could actually be beaten, not just challenged. The possibility that Billy's rage could finally produce something other than collateral damage. What ultimately convinced Billy wasn't Kane's logic alone. It was the emotional promise beneath it. Kane wasn't just offering revenge. Kane was offering a way for Billy to reclaim control of his own narrative. If Billy joined this alliance, he wouldn't be reacting to Victor anymore. He would be acting. He would be choosing the battlefield. He would be deciding the timing. He would be shaping the outcome instead of surviving it. And for someone like Billy, that was intoxicating. The agreement didn't happen with celebration. It happened with a quiet, heavy understanding that they had just stepped into something that could destroy them, if handled carelessly. Kane and Billy didn't need to shake hands dramatically or declare loyalty out loud. The moment Billy accepted the premise, the alliance already existed. From that point forward, everything became about precision. They had to decide what their public conflict would look like. It couldn't be too mild, or it would seem suspicious. It couldn't be too extreme, or it would become uncontrollable. They needed a feud believable enough to satisfy observers, but not so chaotic that it created real damage between them. The best lies were always rooted in truth, and Kane understood that there was already enough genuine tension between him and Billy to make their public hostility effortless. They didn't have to invent resentment. They simply had to lean into it, amplify it, and let everyone assume it was the whole story. Kane felt a strange discomfort as he accepted the necessity of this. He was not someone who enjoyed living in a mask. He could strategize, he could manipulate when required, but he preferred control to drama. Yet he also knew that drama was Billy's natural environment. Billy could make conflict look real without trying, because for Billy, conflict was always real. Even when Billy acted, he acted from a place of emotional truth. That would be their advantage. Billy, on the other hand, felt a different kind of discomfort. Not because he was afraid of deception, but because he was afraid of discipline. Billy's greatest weakness had always been his inability to stay inside the boundaries of a plan when his emotions flared. If he was going to do this, he had to master himself in ways he had failed to before. That realization hit him harder than Victor ever had, because it meant Billy couldn't blame anyone else for what happened next. If he ruined this, it would be his fault. Kane watched Billy struggle with that quietly. Kane didn't lecture him. Kane didn't demand promises. Kane simply made the stakes clear without cruelty. This wasn't another impulsive strike. This was a war of endurance, and endurance required restraint. The alliance formed a kind of silent pressure between them. Every move Kane made now had to be weighed not only against Victor's possible reactions, but against the need to maintain the illusion. Every move Billy made had to be measured against the same. They weren't just fighting Victor. They were fighting perception. Kane's fear of Victor's retaliation didn't diminish after forming the alliance. If anything, it sharpened. Because now Kane understood what he truly had to lose. If Victor discovered this partnership, he wouldn't just attack Kane and Billy. He would annihilate them. He would expose them, humiliate them, twist the truth until everyone saw them as fools, conspirators, criminals in suits. Victor would turn their secrecy into proof of weakness. He would make sure their attempt to outsmart him became the reason they were destroyed. And yet, that fear didn't stop Kane. It fueled him. Because fear, properly used, was not paralysis. It was attention. Kane began anticipating Victor's next steps with the same focus a man might use when listening for footsteps outside his door at night. He imagined Victor looking for new partners, seeking someone hungry, resentful, eager to climb. He imagined Victor approaching allies he had once discarded, promising them relevance again. He imagined Victor using Jack as a shield, letting Jack negotiate or distract while Victor did the real damage elsewhere. Kane didn't need proof of Victor's plans to believe in them. Victor's entire history was proof. Billy, meanwhile, turned inward in a way that surprised even himself. He had always worn his rage openly, letting it explode out of him because he didn't know what else to do with it. Now, he had to contain it. He had to keep it alive without letting it burn him down. That required a shift in Billy's identity. Had to see himself not as a man who reacted, but as a man who waited. Waiting was torture for Billy. It meant sitting with the discomfort, sitting with the feeling that Victor was somewhere out there, still confident, still smug, still believing he had already won. Billy had to swallow that image like poison and keep walking anyway. He had to trust that the poison would become useful later. In public, the performance began. Kane and Billy did what they had agreed to do. They made it look like they couldn't stand each other. Their disagreements appeared sharp and personal. Their tension seemed to build with every interaction, creating the illusion that they were moving toward some inevitable clash. People watching them would feel entertained, perhaps even satisfied, because conflict was a familiar story in Genoa City, and Billy Abbott clashing with someone was never shocking. But beneath that familiar story, something else was happening. Something quieter. Something far more dangerous. Every time Kane and Billy appeared to undermine each other, they were actually testing the environment. Who reacted? Who listened too carefully? Who seemed pleased by their division? Kane paid attention to the subtle shifts, the micro-reactions that revealed where Victor's influence might already be spreading. Billy paid attention to different things: tone, timing, the way certain names surfaced in conversation, the way certain doors seemed to close faster than they should. Kane and Billy were gathering data without looking like they were gathering anything at all. The alliance became less about grand gestures and more about constant calculation. They didn't need to strike yet. They needed to understand. They needed to predict. Victor was the kind of enemy you didn't beat by charging at him. You beat him by starving him of certainty. Kane's ultimate goal remained clear in his mind: put Victor in his place once and for all. Not just embarrass him, not just inconvenience him, but reduce his ability to control the board entirely. Kane wanted Victor's power stripped down until it was no longer mythic. Kane wanted Victor to be forced into the same helplessness he had inflicted on others for decades. Billy's ultimate goal felt similar but more personal. Billy didn't just want Victor powerless. Billy wanted Victor to feel what it was like to lose and not be able to fix it. Billy wanted Victor to realize that his intimidation no longer worked, that his threats no longer carried the same weight, that his name was no longer enough to make people kneel. Billy wanted Victor to taste irrelevance like ash in his mouth. Yet even as Billy burned for that outcome, he could not ignore the strange psychological trap Victor represented. Victor had lived rent-free in Billy's head for too long, shaping Billy's choices even when Billy believed he was acting freely. Billy realized, uncomfortably, that defeating Victor might not liberate him the way he imagined. It might leave him facing an emptiness he didn't know how to fill. Billy didn't want to admit that, but the fear flickered anyway. Kane, ever more controlled, didn't indulge that fear. Kane turned every doubt into strategy. If Billy feared emptiness, Kane would keep him focused on the mission. If Billy felt tempted to lash out early, Kane would redirect him toward patience. Their partnership wasn't warm, but it was effective, built on the understanding that they were both too invested to turn back now. The deeper the alliance settled into place, the more it began to feel like a loaded weapon sitting on a tablet, quiet, still, but capable of ending everything in one decisive moment. And Victor, as always, remained the looming shadow over it all. Kane could almost sense Victor's instincts sharpening even from a distance. Victor was not a man who ignored movement in the air, even if he didn't know the exact shape of what Kane and Billy had created. Kane believed Victor would eventually feel that something had shifted. Victor didn't need evidence to suspect danger. He trusted his gut more than most people trusted facts. That was why Kane refused to relax. The moment he relaxed was the moment Victor would win. Kane's paranoia wasn't irrational. It was the price of survival. He watched for signs of Victor recruiting new allies. He watched for signs of Jack's influence growing closer to Victor's orbit. He watched for any indication that Victor was laying groundwork for something bigger than a simple comeback. Billy, too, became more vigilant not because he enjoyed it, but because he had finally found something worth protecting. For once, Billy wasn't chasing chaos. He was shaping it. And that made him dangerous in a way even he hadn't fully grasped yet. Still, the greatest risk remained the same. Their secret had to stay secret. If anyone saw through their performance, if anyone noticed that their hostility was too convenient, too perfectly timed, too neatly aligned with Victor's vulnerabilities, then the entire plan would collapse. Kane and Billy had to be careful not to overplay their hand. They had to look like enemies, not actors. They had to let their public conflict feel messy and uncontrolled. It was a strange balancing act. They were using chaos as cover, but they could not allow chaos to become real. Kane, especially, struggled with this. He was used to control. He was used to building plans with clean edges. Now he had to step into mess, let mess spill outward, let people believe the mess was truth. Billy, ironically, found it easier. Mess was familiar to him. He knew how to make conflict believable because conflict had always been his instinct. Yet Billy also knew that too much authenticity could become dangerous. If he let his anger take over completely, he could end up actually burning the bridge between him and Kane, destroying the alliance with his own hands. So Billy learned to aim his rage like a spotlight instead of a fire. And as days passed, the alliance hardened into something that felt almost inevitable. Kane and Billy were no longer just talking about countering Victor. They were actively positioning themselves to do it. They were watching, predicting, waiting for the moment Victor made the first true move of his retaliation. Because Victor would move. Kane had no doubt about that. Victor was not a man who tolerated loss. He was not a man who forgave those who embarrassed him. He was not a man who simply waited for time to heal what time could never heal in his mind. The insult of being challenged. Kane could feel that retaliation approaching like thunder you heard before you saw lightning. And the pressure of that approaching storm created something profound between Kane and Bill, not trust, not friendship, but a shared determination sharpened into a kind of silent vow. They would not be caught off guard. They would not be divided. They would not become victims of Victor's manipulations the way so many others had. They would make Victor pay. The only question was how soon Victor would give them the opening they needed. Because in the end, this alliance wasn't about fighting loud. It was about striking at the exact moment Victor believed he was safest. It was about taking advantage of the confidence Victor could never fully abandon. The arrogance that made him assume he could always outplay everyone. And Kane knew something Victor didn't. Arrogance was not armor. It was a blindfold. The night Kane finally left Billy with the alliance fully formed, he didn't feel relief. He felt weight. He felt the heavy, unmistakable awareness that he had just chosen a path where there was no turning back. This was no longer about resisting Victor's retaliation. This was about initiating a war Victor didn't know existed yet. Billy felt something else as he walked away, an emotion he hadn't expected. Not joy, not peace. Something sharper and darker, satisfaction. Because for the first time in a long time, Billy wasn't just angry. He was purposeful. He could almost taste the moment Victor would realize the ground beneath him had shifted. And somewhere in Genoa City, Victor Newman continued to move through his world like a king who believed the crown was permanent. Kane's thoughts returned again and again to the same fear: Victor would retaliate. And he would do it soon. Victor would search for partners. He would build a new alliance. He would likely believe Kane and Billy were too fractured to pose a real threat. That belief would be Victor's greatest mistake. Because Kane and Billy had already decided they would let Victor think he was hunting them, when in reality they were hunting him. And as the city slept beneath its glittering surface, the secret anti-Victor alliance waited. Perfectly disguised, perfectly patient. Ready to strike the moment Victor made his next move, and aware that the very public feud he was watching so closely was the mask hiding the blade that would finally be aimed straight at his throat. The only thing Kane didn't know yet was this. Would Victor's retaliation begin with Jack, or would it begin with a move so unexpected that even Kane and Billy would have only seconds to react before everything exploded? On our TV Spoilers channel. I always seek content inspiration for each video by compiling short video clips to analyze and offer my personal opinions. This channel specializes in analyzing, theorizing, and discussing plot points in the Young and the Restless series from the perspective of a longtime fan. Through this, viewers can gain deeper, more objective, and more interesting perspectives. Subscribe to the channel to stay updated on the latest news about the Young and the Restless series.